Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 1st of July 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson. Myself, Brian Gerrish.
We're back to the old normal time then?
We are, yeah. 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock,
Good.
Absolutely, good stuff. Well, a bit of good news perhaps. Excess mortality, the figures were out yesterday as usual from the ONS. And this past week's the latest statistics showing that deaths down below the 5-year average once again. Now we're going to be talking a little bit more about the 5-year average a little bit later, but I just thought that was a useful statistic to put up.
Any mention of R?
Not in these statistics, no.
No, it seems to have disappeared.
Absolutely.
R's disappeared.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there we go.
But apparently Leicester has disappeared as well, Brian, because a big red line has been drawn around it. This is the map that the government pushed out this morning. Everybody inside the red line is in difficulties. Everybody outside it, apparently not. You'll be covering this a bit more in a second, but what I wanted to highlight was this article from the Mail here. The Leicester Lockdown divide. Neighbours living just inches apart tell of their confusion. The city is split between those who must stay at home and those gaining new freedoms, as police say they will spot check cars leaving restricted zone.
It's just like East Germany, isn't it? The restricted. You are now leaving the restricted zone.
Absolutely. Now, this was the interesting graph that I wanted to highlight from this. This is Leicester daily new COVID-19 cases. And if you look at that graph, you've got to wonder why Leicester is in lockdown. But it seems that there's two sets of figures here, one called Pillar 1 and one called Pillar 2. And you won't be able to see the text underneath that graph there, but it says that that's Pillar 1 data. It seems that the government is the only organisation that has access to the Pillar 2 data, which includes testing from private company testing. Pillar 1 is the likes of key workers and so on, public sector testing. So if the government are the only people that has access to the Pillar 2 data, then we've got to take the government's word for it that Leicester needs to be locked down or locked up again at this point. And it's interesting that the British Medical Association today has said that the government needs to start providing this Pillar 2 data so that local medical facilities, local hospitals can understand the situation before there's any claim of a lockup. So what is the Mail saying here? This non-essential shops that reopened on the 15th of June have been closed again. Bars, restaurants not reopening till on the 4th of July. Schools closing from tomorrow, and relaxation of shielding measures, which was due on the 6th, can't go ahead. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in the situation. It seems that the government can tell us that a situation is true without publishing the data to back it up.
That's exactly where we are, Mike, and that is incredibly dangerous. Let's just cover a little bit more of that article. We're going to have quite a bit of Mail stuff today, which I think we should. We'll see. We'll be explaining why. So this is one of the key pictures, and what it's explaining is that due to the lines drawn on the map, you've got two families, or two groups, family groups living next door to each other. But the significance of this picture is that these ladies are actually locked down, but their immediate neighbours, the gentleman on the right, are not locked down. So where does that leave us? Well, it certainly leads our little virus friend sitting in the middle utterly confused, because apparently he's not supposed to jump over the non-existent fence there. But what's really been brought in here is confusion. And if you read this Mail article, there's some quotes from other people in the article where they're actually saying this has actually started to turn the community in some places against each other, not suggesting there's any animosity between the two families shown on screen at the moment, because that's not the case. But in the article it does say that the result of the policy is turning people against each other. And that, of course, was exactly the advice that we saw from the Spade team in the SAGE output from the government, where the Behavioural Insights team was saying that we should ramp up the fear and we should turn communities against each other so that we can keep the pressure on anybody who dares to challenge the government advice. So just remember, that's what came straight out of the Behavioural Insights team through into SAGE. And I'll add that we still have no response from the Behavioural Insights team to our question about a risk assessment done on the basis of ramping up fear. What would that do to people's mental health? Behavioural Insights team doesn't want to respond.
We should remember, of course, Brian, that if we go back to the foot and mouth debacle, this was exactly the type of tactic that was used. Now, at that point, they were giving compensation to some people in the community, some farmers in the community, and not giving compensation to other farmers in the community. In this case, some people get locked up, other people don't get locked up, and it absolutely breaks people apart.
And we are supposed to believe that this policy is accidental. I'm going to say I do not believe that. I think if you follow the policy through, you see how it's been created against the background of that British government 2010 Mindspace document, where they were boasting that they could use applied behavioural psychology to get the population to do what the government wanted. And that psychology put into force via the SAGE advice teams and Spade. And what have we got? We've got people confused and turned against each other. But it's more than that. And this was one of the quotes from the article. It's a lady called Kathleen McDonough. She's on the right. She said she'd been looking forward to seeing her grandson, who she's not been able to visit since lockdown measures were imposed in March. And I'll add, I believe we're coming up to 100 days shortly. This is what I was looking forward to. I used to see him every day. I really miss him. It's awful. I'm not going to the shops. I like to meet my sister in town once a month and have a cup of tea, but I've not seen her since March either. It's my birthday in August and my son was planning to invite us to a party, but I don't think that will happen now. So this is a lady who's clearly suffering as a result of not being able to do very normal and very human things, meet family, meet grandchildren and have normal social interaction. So the direct result of this policy is stress and anxiety. And I'm going to say that all of the evidence that I'm looking at is that this is deliberate by the British government in order to keep the general public under control, keep them locked down, and to put them under stress. All of this makes them even more susceptible to the use of this applied behavioural psychology. So let's have a look at the Leicester lockdown. These are the measures. So all non-essential shops will close, a law to be rushed through to underpin the new restrictions, with 800 plus cases reported there since mid-June, and the area accounted for around 10% of all positive tests in the UK over the past week.
Right, so we've got to highlight this issue of cases, Brian, because of course, if you're testing more, you're going to get more cases. What are the numbers of hospitalisations? What are the numbers of people in critical care at the moment? Is there any evidence to suggest that Leicester is doing worse in terms of hospitalisations, critical care than any other part of the country? I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Where is that evidence?
Well, as we started out, you've just said, Mike, the government doesn't want us to see evidence. As you know, as with data on the risks of face masks, the British government does not want the population to see any medical challenge to their policy of wearing a face mask. So let's follow this through. Schools will close from Thursday. You mentioned that, not reopen until next term. So this is targeting the children again. Many children find being home for long periods, not seeing their friends, very, very stressful. People are advised to avoid all but essential travel to, from and within Leicester, and should stay at home as much as you can. So here it is, the lockdown. Don't go in the fresh air, stay at home, but no formal travel ban at this stage. Easing of lockdown in England on Saturday will not apply in Leicester, meaning pubs, restaurants, hairdressers and cinemas will stay shut. and shielding measures will not be loosened in the city on the 6th of July, unlike the rest of England, where the most clinically vulnerable will be able to spend more time outside. So I'm going to label this, and this is very provocative. It's meant to be, I think, Mike, what we're looking at here is the trialling of a city-state, where you will have the mayor and his team running the city-state of Leicester. This will be, if we want to shut the complete city down, we can do it, and you, the public, will be used to that idea because you'll have been trained during the COVID-19 crisis. And what else did the Mail article show? Well, it showed this. So we've now got soldiers on the street. So is this part of the agenda? Soldiers on the street all being wearing a pinny, which does distract a little bit from the image, but I'm sure the British Army is very happy to be wearing pinnies. But here we are, we've now got troops on the streets, we've got a city lockdown, and as you've just said, this is all based on absolutely no evidence revealed to the UK public. We've just got to believe what President Boris Johnson has said.
Absolutely. Now, on Monday, we were talking about face masks and the use of face masks and so on. And one of the things we were talking about was, well, one of the questions we were asking is, when did COVID actually come into the country? More and more evidence suggesting it came into the country, and in fact right across Europe and perhaps the rest of the world, in December or at the end of last year. Well, in fact, it gets even more interesting. So thank you very much to the person who sent this through to me. This is from the University of Barcelona. Let's do a quick translate of that. SARS-CoV-2 detected in wastewater collected in Barcelona in March 12th, 2019. So that's a year and a bit ago, a year and 2 months ago. Where does that leave us? That means that SARS-CoV-2 was being distributed around Europe in March 2019, a year ago. Let's just bring this graph back on the screen again. This is when the lockdown took place in week 13 this year. And our question was, what was Corona doing in all this time? Now we're saying on this particular graph from the beginning of the year, but in fact we're talking about a year in front of that again. So what was Corona doing all that time for him to be found in a frozen sample of wastewater in Spain from March 2019? He was clearly doing the rounds of everybody.
He was already there,
and nobody noticed. And so that is why, once again, we are labeling the red shaded area on this graph as lockdown deaths. The significant excess mortality began on the date of the lockdown and ended this week. And so there are many questions to be asked. And let's just remind everybody once again, in New York, another example where the spike in excess mortality began with the lockdown. And if we look at the average across Europe and take an average of the start of lockdown in various European countries, we get the same picture. This is not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence, Mike. And just to pop back to the COVID virus and the sewage, of course, one of the things that's been pointed out to us is that having known the existence of the virus in sewage, this means that when you talked about protections that people should have been taking, sorry to be graphic, but cleaning the toilet and cleaning the toilet seat wasn't in fact as important as washing your hands. But of course, nothing from the British government about the dangers of COVID virus in sewage. They didn't want to talk about that because this is one of the great hidden secrets. And now we can see that actually even talking about it takes you back to the timeline and raises further questions. Well, if people aren't already troubled enough with fear of the COVID-19 virus, we've got more to come. So this is really being pushed through now on the public. We've got the Sun, high alert, schools, hospitals and offices told to prepare for marauding terror attacks. So I'm having some trouble now, Mike, actually, because I've spent nearly 100 days being vigilant for COVID, the virus, but now I've also got to prepare myself for marauding terror attacks. And this is because the Home Office has decided that now is a good time to re-release information that it's previously published because of the problems in Reading and elsewhere. They've republished advice urging the public, and here are the words, to rehearse their response to fast-moving terror attacks or incidents. I wonder how we're going to be rehearsing those, but what is this actually doing? Well, of course, this is more fear, anxiety and stress on the public mind. And I'm going to say once again, the more fear, anxiety and stress people are absorbing, the easier it is to pump in the applied behavioural psychology to control the way they think and behave. I think something very dangerous is going on here. The mail, back to the mail. Is your teen secretly struggling with depression? How Gen Z is using the secret code "I had pasta tonight" as a cry for help. So you notice that this has been produced by Erica Tempesta. I think this is all part of the people producing news after taking it essentially off the internet. But nevertheless, this article published, it's pushed out. I think many parents could actually be very upset by this article. So we've got another dose of fear, anxiety and stress. And clearly the Mail hasn't had enough of all of this, because another Mail article picked up on here, workers' health starts to fail at the age of 59. So if you think that you're just about coping with COVID, you can cope with the terrorist attacks, you can just about hold your job down, although you're worried about the mental health of your children, well, the Mail's got the answer, because if you're getting on a bit, you're probably not going to survive. So we'll label that one with fear, anxiety and stress. Is this a coincidence, Mike? I just do not think it can be, because it's pouring out across the whole of the mainstream media, and this certainly seems to be an agenda to create stress, fear, anxiety in the British public.
It's quite interesting that, well, towards the end of the programme, we're going to have a segment on censorship and social media companies, some of the big social media companies and so on. The mainstream media is running a campaign at the moment to deal with the infodemic, as they're calling it, over COVID-19.
Well, too much information, is it?
Well, they are objecting to the wrong kind of information, in inverted commas.
Right.
But there's a complete lack of self-awareness in this, because the mainstream media is pumping out worse information than just about, anybody else.
That's correct. And of course, the BBC website is only coronavirus and the effects of coronavirus and coronavirus statistics. So the BBC now is just a one-trick pony. It's coronavirus, and that's what you pay your license fee for.
Good. Now, if you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. And just to put the correct address on screen, because we had the wrong information on Monday, here is the details for David Noakes if you'd like to write and offer a bit of support. His prison number is 457501. He's in Fleury-Mérogis prison.
The same prison as
Lynn-Thayer, absolutely. Yeah. And the details on screen there in France. So let's move on. Coronavirus upper crust owner blames lockdown for 5,000 UK redundancies, says Sky News. Well, this is their owner, SSP. They've announced 5,000 UK redundancies. That's half its workforce. And they're saying that this is mainly being caused by the massive reduction in passenger numbers at railway stations and airports. So they have 850 food outlets, and that's in no great shakes. Airbus also have announced redundancies, 15,000 jobs, 1,700 in the UK, 5,000 jobs going in France, 5,000 in Germany, 900 in Spain, 1,300 at other places. So the story doesn't get any better. Yesterday, in fact, let's move back to Saturday. Michael Gove was giving a speech to the Ditchley Foundation, and I just wanted to run through a couple of the things that he said there. So here is Michael Gove. Of course, he is not currently Environment Secretary. That's I do apologise, mislabelled. He's currently Cabinet Office Minister and Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. So what did he say on Saturday? He said, Roosevelt took it as a given that no society could succeed unless every citizen within it had the chance to succeed. He said reform is needed. He was talking about the civil service, and he said that reform builds from the bottom up and not from the top down. and puts faith once more in forgotten man at the bottom of the pyramid. I do apologize. That actually is another quote with respect to Roosevelt, right? So he's basically suggesting that there is apparently a shift in policy with respect to the economy coming out of central government. But the question is, what is the nature of that shift in policy? He said FDR asked his government to remember to forget the forgotten man in 2016, the 2016 referendum. That's, of course, the Brexit referendum. Those who'd been too often forgotten asked to be remembered. So he is apparently claiming that they intend to remember everybody that voted for Brexit, who could, because the normal explanation for why so many people voted for Brexit, of course, was because of disillusionment with globalization and the idea that people had been left behind. So anyway, he went on to say, getting onto the, I've jumped ahead of myself a little bit, but getting onto the civil service aspect of this, he said, groupthink can affect any organization. And he said, for many decades now, we've neglected to ensure that senior members of the civil service have all the basic skills required to serve government and our citizens well. And a dig at common purpose, perhaps, he said, too much current civil service training is about vapid abstractions such as collaborating better rather than about what works. So this seemed to give some kind of indication that there was a shift coming in the attitude and the direction of the current administration. And then, of course, this was followed up on Monday by the departure of Mark Sedwill from his role as the National Security Advisor and obviously the Secretary, the Cabinet Office Secretary, the head of the British Civil Service. So then yesterday, this was followed up with Boris offering what he was describing as a new deal. So, well, what was he talking about? Build, build, build. It's all about infrastructure and so on. Let's just briefly have a listen to a couple of the points that he was making. Now, these points are from the Q&A afterwards. This isn't from the main presentation.
And I think what we've set out is the most radical, boldest, and most ambitious vision for investment in the infrastructure and the public services of this country that I can think of in my political lifetime. But it's also the building of the platform. This is the crucial thing. It's the building of the platform, the bedrock for the private sector, with all its ingenuity, to invest and to come up with new jobs and new businesses. I think that the package we've set out is the right one. It's a massive program of investment, of backing and believing in Britain. But I also understand that on top of that bedrock of infrastructure, you need dynamic private sector concerns. And you need to make sure that the fiscal environment, as we leave the EU, the fiscal environment has got to be as competitive as it can possibly be. Because I want people to be starting up companies, I want people to be developing their companies, and I want people, as I said in the speech, I want brilliant British ideas being translated into brilliant British companies, billion-pound British companies, and not just disappearing to America or China or wherever else. This is about creating the conditions for long-term increases in productivity and prosperity. You know, as I said in the speech, our companies are not as productive as they could be, some of them. We take too long to get things done. It costs too much. It costs the taxpayer too much to get things done. So I do think that this is the moment to do it. I agree with you that you say I'm a glass half full kind of man. Well, yes, I am. I mean, I believe profoundly that we will get through this, and we'll get through this very well. I'm not going to understate the challenge, but I also think the opportunity is massive.
So that's what he had to say, and on the face of it, that sounds very interesting because, of course, this is something that I've been arguing for many, many years, that we use infrastructure, and any productive economy needs a healthy basic economic infrastructure, that we use that to help build productive manufacturing industry rather than the sort of servicing each other as we are doing or have been doing up until this point in recent years, as we've seen manufacturing and other productive jobs disappear. So let's just have a quick look at what was actually announced then, because perhaps the announcements don't quite fit with the rhetoric. So what have we got? £1.5 billion this year for hospital maintenance. Well, I'm not quite sure how this produces productive jobs. We've got £100 million this year for 29 projects to improve our road network. Okay, but is £100 million sufficient to do that? Bearing in mind that just about all the investment in the roads network in the last 10 years has been about developing smart motorways and putting fibre optic cables up the roads rather than actually
filling in the potholes.
Exactly. Let's see, £1 billion to fund the first 50 projects of a new 10-year school rebuilding programme. Well, how about fixing the educational standards as well while you're at it? There's no mention of that. £560 million and £200 million for repairs and upgrades to schools and further education colleges, respectively. And then what's the next one? £142 million for digital upgrades and maintenance to around 100 courts this year. This is an issue that we've been discussing for quite some time, the digitisation of courts. Of course, the ultimate aim of that is to remove juries from the courts. This isn't necessarily, well, for sure it's not a productive use of money either. £83 million for the maintenance of prisons and youth offender facilities, and £60 million for temporary prison places. Why do we need temporary prison places? But anyway, £900 million for a range of shovel-ready local growth projects in England. There's similar amounts of money for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, according to the usual calculation on that. And then what we've got here is £96 million to accelerate investment in town centres and high streets. So far, the official announcement hasn't really produced anything terribly productive. Let's go on. It starts to get a bit green at this point. Additional funding this year to attract investment in gigafactories. So this is all about high-tech battery technology and so on for electric cars and other similar green projects. £10 million of funding will be made available immediately for the first wave of innovative R&D projects to scale up manufacturing of the latest technologies in batteries, motors, electronics and fuel cells. Okay, next, still pretty green, reforesting Britain by planting 75,000 acres of trees every year by 2025. £40 million Green Recovery Challenge Fund to help halt biodiversity loss, and up to £100 million of funding for research and development of a brand new clean technology, direct air capture, which is apparently just going to pull the carbon dioxide right out of the air and capture it and store it somehow. So those are the things that have been actually announced so far. Now they have mentioned something that they're calling Project Spade, which they're saying is going to bring forward proposals to deliver public investment projects more strategically and efficiently, and this will ensure that they're building the right things better and faster than ever before. So there we go. But we've got to remember this, because if you remember, not so long ago, several months ago, Grant Shapps went off to a branch line. Can't remember exactly where it was. It was North Wales, I think. And because they were going to reverse the effects of the beaching reforms, which removed all the branch lines from our rail network. And people said, well, this sounds very good. And lots of people very keen to see this happen because, of course, when they removed the branch lines, that actually cut off a lot of communities from tourism, tourist trade and other
local
things.
Trade, yeah.
And local trade. But in fact, and they were promising £500 million for this. But in fact, when you actually worked out what they were putting the money into, it was merely feasibility studies to see whether it was possible at some point in the future, maybe perhaps to start rebuilding some branch lines, and as for Michael Gove himself, well, of course, while he was Environment Secretary, which is why those original slides were mislabeled, he had said this: as we leave the EU, we have an historic opportunity to deliver a farming policy which works for the whole industry. Now, many farmers will tell you that their industry is being decimated at the moment, and of course there was a lot of hope within the farming community that as we came out of the EU and no longer part of the Common Agricultural Policy, that there would be some kind of shift in policy with respect to how farming was funded in this country. But in fact, when Michael Gove published the documentation on this, it turned out that most of the money that had been going to the Common Agricultural Policy would only be handed over to farmers if they were in fact using their farms for things other than farming. For example, wildflower meadows, woodland, creating nice paths for people to walk along, and not about food production at all. So the question in my mind is, because I absolutely applaud what Boris has presented here as far as it goes. It's something that, as I say, I've been arguing for a long time. But what is he actually going to produce, and what is he actually going to do at this point? People need to be putting a bit of pressure on to make sure this heads in the right direction. Now, the question in my mind is, I wonder what the reaction from the mainstream press and the British establishment has been to this. Well, here's the BBC. Well, this was this morning. They had total of nothing about it. Yeah. Yesterday evening, they had one small article on the thing and weren't really discussing it very much at all. So the policy here seems to be one of silence. So let's look at the front pages of the newspapers. Perhaps they have something. Well, here's The Guardian. More lockdowns on the way, warns experts. Here's the Metro. Lockdown city's mayor broke lockdown. Here's the Daily Star. Bog roll bandits are back, is their headline. Fantastic. The Daily Telegraph. Heat on as PHE as PM admits response sluggish. And the other headlines on that page, nothing whatever to do with this. And then we have the Independent, or the Eye, biggest change in planning laws since the war. Now that is part of what Boris announced yesterday, because what he said was that it's taking far too long, as you heard in that little excerpt there, it's taking far too long to get infrastructure projects done. And I mean, anybody that's tried to drive around Birmingham understands this completely, because the roadworks around the Birmingham road networks have basically been in place for about 25 years, it seems. There's never any progress made on that whatsoever. The same for Crossrail, the same for any big infrastructure projects. They never actually seem to progress. The Times, what did they have to say? Well, nothing at all about this at all in any way. Daily Express, wonder drug will save thousands of lives. Nothing much about it. We've got a little bit of Boris slashing red tape to speed up the COVID fight back, but no great detail, certainly not a front page story. Police to probe the UK's worst baby ward scandal, according to the Daily Mail. Financial Times has nothing on it. You would expect them to have had something. Only the Mirror has something. Boris deal not enough to save jobs. And of course, this is true. It's not enough. As it stands, it's not enough. And it seems like it's too slow to do anything about the 9 million people that are currently on furlough. That are many of those are likely to lose their jobs in the next 3 months or so. Certainly nothing that Boris announced yesterday is going to do anything about that. That's not to say that if he keeps his word, and I know there's some skepticism about whether that, I understand the skepticism about whether he would do that, but if he keeps his word, then perhaps there's opportunities for people in the future, but it doesn't end there, because of course part and parcel of this whole apparent shift in direction here was the removal of Mark Sedwill, as we mentioned, and his replacement with David Frost as the National Security Advisor. And the reaction to that posting has been pretty vitriolic. So here's Theresa May from, I think it was Wednesday afternoon in the House of Commons. Just watch Theresa May's face here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all pay tribute to Sir Mark Sedwill and thank him for his extraordinary public service over many years. I served on the National Security Council for 9 years, 6 years as Home Secretary and 3 as Prime Minister. During that time, I listened to the expert, independent advice from national security advisers. On Saturday, my right honourable friend said, we must be able to promote those with proven expertise. Why then is the new National Security Advisor a political appointee with no proven expertise in national security.
Well, like my right honourable friend, I too want to pay tribute again to Sir Mark, and I appreciate, having served in Cabinet when she was Prime Minister, when Sir Mark was Cabinet Secretary, just how much we all owe to him for his distinguished public service. I should also say that we have had previous national security advisors, all of them excellent, not all of them necessarily people who were steeped in the security world, some of whom were distinguished diplomats in their own right. So David Frost is a distinguished diplomat in his own right, and it is entirely appropriate that the Prime Minister of the day should choose an advisor appropriate to the needs of the hour.
So I don't know what you think about that.
I think we've got to ask lots of questions, Mike, because who is the new man? What is he really going to be doing? We had lots of questions about Sedwell and the power base that he'd built inside government. Now we're told at the stroke of a hat, aside from renewing the country and huge infrastructure build, Boris Johnson is now putting his personal seal on security with this immensely powerful position. So we're going to have to watch this.
Well, I'm going to come on to that in a second. In the meantime, we've got this guy, Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's chief of staff and a British diplomat, saying Cummings versus the civil service. This looks very much like a rolling coup. Time to resist. So the question is it time to resist? Because this is effectively Tony Blair speaking. And then we have him following that up with an article in The Independent, the Johnson-Cummings war on the civil service. Do go and have a look at that article. It's quite interesting. But the question is, who is David Frost? And thanks to David Scott, who sent this through to me earlier this morning. The Courier in Scotland profile David Frost, Brexit-supporting ex-diplomat, who condemned Edinburgh's filthy streets, now one of the most powerful figures in the Johnson government. So they give a brief CV that he came out of Oxford to study, having studied French and history, got a first-class degree, then went and joined the Foreign Office. He met Boris for the first time in 1993 when he was posted to Brussels, and it was there that he said he became Eurosceptic. And then, since then, of course, he has become a full Brexiteer. He then went through the Foreign Office, ended up as ambassador to Denmark, and following that, he went and worked with the Scotch Whisky Association. This is something that lots of people from the Foreign Office seem to do, but he went and headed that up for a while. And I think it was while he was there, he was making these comments about Edinburgh streets. But what's interesting, he was according to this article, took part while he was at the Scotch Whisky Association. He took part in Any Questions, which is a BBC political interview program. And while he was there, one of the people that had seen that said he was head and shoulders above everyone on the panel as an analyst and someone with knowledge. He landed his points with the subtlety of a diplomat. He still had a little of the steel there, but it was cloaked in ambivalence and charm, is how he was described. He then went back to the Foreign Office as political advisor while Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary. He lost that job when Boris stepped down from that, and since Boris became Prime Minister, he has become the UK's chief Brexit negotiator. Now, of course, Brexit negotiations still going on for the future relationship with the EU. And if you remember that when Barnier presented his plans for that future relationship, it was divided 50-50 between trade on the left-hand side of the diagram and defence, security and intelligence on the right-hand side of the diagram. These two are the two key areas that are of most importance to the EU. Frost is apparently not playing ball. Some speculation, and I think it's right, that the defence, security and intelligence aspect of this, because Britain still wants a relationship in this area with the EU, and the EU absolutely wants a relationship with Britain on this, because Britain provides a lot of the money for this infrastructure in the EU, so they want this relationship in place. There is suggestion that David Frost is using the defence, security and intelligence part of that as a bargaining chip to get the trade deal in place. So that's who he is, Brian, and what he is, well, that remains to be seen, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it certainly does, because there's so much we don't know at the moment. We've just got this smokescreen and general chaos. We come back to Dominic Cummings drawing up his plans for a major overhaul of the civil service. We reported this on Monday. He says a hard rain is going to fall. So we don't really know much about Dominic Cummings, except that he seems to have unbelievable power. And he's not only said he's going to deal with the civil service, he's going to deal with the Cabinet Office. I labelled it as the whole coronavirus pandemic as a political scam to destabilise the UK. I'm going to stick by that, because you want the country destabilised so that you can reframe it, you can change direction. And we asked the question, if power was going to be stripped from the Cabinet Office, who's actually going to be running the government? Well, we're saying it's not even a proper government, it's a government of occupation. The point is, it's becoming very unclear at the moment what's happening politically and who's running the country. But we've got more now on Cummings. So apparently he's going to be running a special boot camp. Now, I paid attention to this because you could just take the article as an attack on Cummings, but the boot camp idea fits in perfectly with the fact that you are going to take people for reframing. This has been going on throughout the government for a very long time. I've already mentioned the Mindspace document, but we know that the use of applied behavioural psychology has been unleashed within the government, and DEFRA originally for the foot and mouth. And now we've got Cummings taking people away to get them reframed. And he's saying you've got to have read a couple of books. So there's one detailed in the headline, High Output Management by Andrew Grove, which includes the phrase, only the paranoid can survive. So in the article in the paper, it's got this particular book, and the author came out of the communist bloc, out of Hungary, but then came good in America. But apparently this is one of the books that people have got to understand. Now, just couple that with the warning that we took out of Policy Exchange. These think tanks are not there for fun, they're there because they can influence and steer government policy. And here was modernising Britain, and when we took a detailed look at what they were talking about, of course it included exactly the boost to infrastructure that Boris is talking about. And we also picked up on the fact that it seems to be heading towards a major change in society. So here was the government establishing a council of UK civic leaders to be chaired by the Prime Minister. He's the only person running the country, of course. But this tends to bring us to the idea of the city-state control. So we thought this is interesting. Let's have a look at this one, though, the future for constitutional reform. This has come out of the package at the same time. So Britain is going to be modernised, but the government is now taking some very interesting steps and recommendations from the Policy Exchange on this. So coming out of the EU has meant that apparently we need to change the whole country. And I think there's many questions to be asked about this. But basically it's saying that there's constitutional issues which arose from us leaving the EU. And they particularly pick up on the Whiteman case, in which an MP was able to secure a ruling from the courts on the matters relevant to a debate in Parliament and on the legal premises on which that debate was to be conducted. To keep this simple, this is about concern that people can actually take government business into the courts and force the government to reveal their hand or make a U-turn. And then the papers picked out three things which it said were very critical. The government should invite Parliament to assert its acceptance that the existence and content of legal advice to government from the law officers or elsewhere is entitled to be regarded as confidential and not to be disclosed to Parliament in any circumstances, except where in the most exceptional circumstance the privilege is voluntarily waived by the government. And I'll just add, as we're talking this through, that think about the fact we already know the government doesn't want to talk about COVID information. The government didn't want to talk about weapons of mass destruction. The government doesn't want to talk about troops on the ground in Syria. They're worried that people can force the hand. So here's the second part. The government should invite Parliament to clarify through its standing orders that each House of Parliament is entitled to seek legal advice from the law officers of the Crown on any matter relevant to matters before it, including where they are relevant matters on which the law officers have already advised the Crown. And this is the third one. The government should invite Parliament to assert with absolute clarity, but preferably not using legislation, that it will regard as a breach of its privileges and contrary to Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, any attempt by one of its members or anyone else for the purposes of proceedings in Parliament to persuade the courts to rule on any matter in which either House has sought or is entitled to seek the advice of the law officers of the Crown. So if we put this in its simplest form, here are the law officers. Their advice to government, totally secret. You're not going to be allowed to see what their advice has been. Even the House is going to find it difficult to get this information out. And certainly the public, well, we don't want the public asking any questions. Now, this is not legislation that I'm talking through. This is simply advice from Policy Exchange, but it's remarkable how often suggested policy from these important think tanks like Policy Exchange ultimately becomes government policy. So I'm just holding up a warning flag. And I'm also point people at this article. I'll keep it very short because we're running up on the stops for time. But this is a lady talking about Article 9 of the Bill of Rights and its application with regard to Parliament. And if we follow this through, I'll leave this for people to freeze on screen. She points out Parliament makes the law. Well, okay, we could have some debate about that. Parliament makes the law and politically calls the government to account for its actions, but the government is also subject to the law and is therefore answerable to the courts if it exceeds or misapplies its powers. And I don't think anybody could disagree with that. And we could say we need this sort of check on the government when they use, for example, applied behavioural psychology. So there's more detail in the article here, which you can read in due course. But I found it interesting that this particular lady gets onto the subject of common law determined by the courts. So as a package, I'm going to suggest that we've got this smokescreen of chaos in the country at the moment, and what we're seeing Boris and Cummings produce is a transformation of UK society. And I think until we see where they ultimately want to go, we should be highly suspicious as to what the agenda really is.
Right, let's just end with this one. Facebook and Google, two of the biggest companies on the planet, I suppose. Well, they've come to the attention of the Competition and Markets Authority, who have said this through examination of this market, and they're talking mainly about advertising, online advertising market, which Google and Facebook have sewn up. We've discovered how major online platforms like Google and Facebook operate and how they use digital advertising to fuel their business models. What we have found is concerning. If the market power of these firms goes unchecked, people and businesses will lose out. People will carry on handing over more of their personal data than necessary. A lack of competition could mean higher prices for goods and services bought online, and we could all miss out on the benefits of the next innovative digital platform. And so they've recommended a number of things that Digital Markets Unit should have the ability to enforce a code of conduct to ensure that platforms with a position of market power like Google and Facebook do not engage in exploitative or exclusionary practices, or practices likely to include to reduce trust and transparency, and to impose fines if necessary. There's a host of other things here. Introduce fairness by design duty on the platforms to ensure that they are making it easy as possible for users to make meaningful choices, and so on. Now, of course, this is all about advertising, and of course, the advertising situation with Facebook and Google coming under massive pressure at the moment because of allegations of inappropriate advertising with political advertising, Trump, COVID-related advertising and this sort of thing. So the question is, why are they pushing this now? Well, perhaps this gives us a clue. This is Stop Hate for Profit, a non-profit set up in the United States that now is claiming to have 400 brands who have decided not to run ads on Facebook this month. This includes Adidas, Ben & Jerry's, Coca-Cola, FC UK, Ford, Honda, HP, Microsoft, Pepsi, Starbucks, and so on. It goes on. So they're not going to advertise on the platform, apparently because there's too much hateful content on Facebook at the moment. Now, of course, when we see the term hate applied to content, this tends to mean a political message that some people don't agree with. And well, this is now being Facebook has responded, and they have launched this effort today. 3 questions to help stamp out false news. Stop, think, and check. And of course, this is all about COVID-19. And who are you collaborating with on this? Well, they're collaborating with the fact-checking service, allegedly Full Fact. And they are going to be running adverts across the UK, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Turkey to support this particular project. And of course, this is all about helping people deal with misinformation spreading on the platforms. And this goes hand in hand with the mainstream media's infodemic campaign. So the attack, therefore, by the Competition and Markets Authority, which many people would say is long overdue. So I'm questioning the timing of it now, when it's just coming in at the same time as these other campaigns. I find it interesting that that's what's going on. Facebook and Google, one of the many things to say against them, but one of the benefits of it has been the level of sharing of information that was never available before YouTube and Facebook were doing what they're doing. So, as much as we don't like them, we don't like the censorship, this type of campaign is only going to increase that censorship. And maybe we should be asking the Competition and Markets Authority about their timing and what they intend to do.
And we need free speech as much as possible at the end of the day, and any of the platforms are capable of giving it. So it's up to us whether we protect that. Well, a very packed news today. We are watching events carefully. We're very interested in what our audience has to think about the things that are happening. So if you've got information on everything from what Boris Johnson is up to changes inside the government, we're interested in your opinions. And of course, if you can back it up with evidence or documents, it becomes even better. I'll just end by saying, Mike, that of course, I'll continue to be alert. So I'm going to stop, think and check. We've mentioned that. We're going to be rehearsing for more terrorist attacks. It's going to be very difficult to think and actually get a news done.
Absolutely.
We'll do our best. Thanks for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Friday. Bye-bye.